Hello, everyone. Welcome to this very important dialogue today on Safe Today, Stay Strong Tomorrow, linking abortion rights with mental health and healing. My name is Aprupa. My pronouns are she and they. I am a sex educator. I'm also the advocacy officer at Global Interfaith Network, and I'll be moderating today's conversation. Before we begin, a gentle note on how we are going to be holding this space. We are talking about abortion, mental health, and healing. For some of us, this can be really validating. For some of us, it might feel a bit tender. So please take care of yourself, step away when you need to, and come back when you can. This recording will also be shared on YouTube, Facebook, etc. So feel free to access it at a later time as well. Please keep coming back to it. This is a stigma free conversation, which means no judgment, no shaming, no moral policing, and no assumptions about who should or should not have abortions. And because this is a feminist, decolonial, queer, and trans affirming space, we acknowledge that abortion care is needed by women and also by trans men and non binary people, and that access is shaped by things like caste, class, disability, religion, age, location, language, family control, and so many other factors. Today's dialogue is hosted by Pratigya Campaign for Gender Equality and Safe Abortion, a collective of over 120 individuals and organizations across India advancing rights to safe, legal, and stigma free abortion care. The campaign's work is also about emotional well being, dignity, and autonomy, and the idea that healing is always part of the care. So here's how the next hour will flow. We'll begin with understanding abortion as essential healthcare. Then we will delve a little deeper into emotional well being and recovery. And we'll also talk about healing through solidarity. You're, of course, welcome to share your thoughts and comments with us throughout the conversation. And without further ado, let me bring on our wonderful speakers for the day. We have Ashutosh, who is the CEO of FRHS India. We also have with us Neha, who is from the Secretariat of Pratigya. We then have Vitika, who is an advisor on sexual and reproductive health and rights. And last but not the least, Japleen, who is the founder and editor in chief of Feminism in India. Thank you so much for being here. It's wonderful to share this platform and this stage with you and to exchange ideas with you and learn alongside you. So, like I promised, let's start with the basics. That abortion is in fact care. And in this in this segment, we'll talk a little bit about systems, we'll talk about access, and we'll also talk about public narratives that shape what young people think is allowed to want, need, or to choose. So, Ashutosh, let me pass the mic to you. From a service provider's perspective, what are some system level barriers, according to you, that affect young people when it comes to accessing safe and timely abortion care?
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. From a systems lens, the biggest barrier is not medical. These are structural and social barriers. This is despite having a progressive abortion law in the country. Young seekers often encounter with delays, over documentations, outright denials at times, and the providers are anxious about legal scrutiny. Young people usually late because they don't know where to go, what is legal, whom to trust, and by the time they reach to a provider, anxiety is already very high. So even a single judgmental comment can push someone away from the safe care. And let us also look at the governance from a provider's point of view. The MTP Act governs abortion services in India. It defines by who, where, when an abortion services may be provided. And then you have another act which is protection of children from sexual offense. We call it POSCO. This act is to prevent and address child sexual abuse. Now, these two acts are overlaps, wherein the POSCO requires a mandatory reporting on behalf of medical providers for the minor who's seeking safe abortion services. This has an intent to prevent abuse. However, this mandatory reporting has created fear to abortion providers, which again is a barrier to access to safe abortion.
Right, absolutely, Ashutosh. I think what you said around like cost and confidentiality, even the fear of being seen, like you rightly pointed out, that fear of being judged, provider judgment, and also like the provider kind of issues when it comes to providing abortion care. So, what are some fears and misconceptions do these young people express when they come and seek abortion care for the first time? What are some things you've heard, Ashutosh?
Okay, again, because we are also into the service delivery, we are also providing abortion services. So, we should understand that abortion is a very time sensitive and essential component of an healthcare. Yet, access remains challenging for many in India. Delays often occurs because by the time the first time seeker realize that they are pregnant, it is already reduced the window of safe and legal procedure. And again, as I said, despite India's progressive abortion law, misconceptions persist. I mean, particularly among young unmarried individuals who wrongly believe that abortion is illegal for them or illegal in India. And then again, as we were earlier stating, that the breach of confidentiality further increase their anxiety. Questions in their mind is, what if their parents be informed or the community will come to know? And often a provider's judgmental behavior also a very big barrier to safe abortion. And this is again very high when it comes to rural area. I mean, these challenges are actually compounded by in rural area we have limited healthcare infrastructures, and on top of it we have social stigma. Abortion seekers often interacts with frontline worker because where else they will go? I mean, either they'll go to a frontline worker or to a provider. And these frontline workers and providers are also from the community, which again then increase the fear to get exposed. So these are the real ground challenges on which a provider is seeking, or of course the fear and misconceptions that young
Mhm.
people, the young community have. I'll stop here.
Absolutely. No, thanks, Ashutosh. I think it's so important that we ground this conversation on the fact that it's beyond just information. There are so many other emotional and practical needs that a young person also has that need to be catered to. So I'd like to bring Neha on board at this point. Neha, from the campaign's perspective, from the Pratigya campaign's perspective, if you could first take us through a little bit about what the campaign does, how it came into being, and also like if you can talk to us a little bit about what are some of the gaps that you're seeing in how abortion is being discussed right now in public or in online spaces.
Thanks, Aparupa. Let me just give a very brief introduction of the Pratigya campaign on gender equality and safe abortion. The coalition's been in existence since 2013. It's a national coalition. We are a movement of over 120 organizations and individual members. All of us together, working towards ensuring, access to legal and safe abortion services in India. It's been a long journey for us. And over the period of time, as the abortion landscape changed and evolved in India, so did the priorities also of the coalition. I would like to focus more on what our current priorities are. So, we've also realized that for the longest period, young people were missing from the conversation when we're talking about abortions. So, one of our key focus areas for the currently for the Pratigya campaign is to bring the focus back on young people. And we also have an ulterior motive because young people, when they understand abortion as essential healthcare, as you mentioned, when they look at abortion beyond the lens of stigma, these are the people who will probably become our future generation of abortion champions. So that's also very important for us why we want to engage with them and bring them in this conversation. So that is one thing we are trying, and we're also trying to focus a lot of our work through social media because we realize that if we are trying to reach to the audiences, social media is probably one of the better routes to go about it. But beyond just reaching people, we're also trying to create safe spaces, stigma-free spaces, where people can share their queries, can share about their experiences, their emotional journeys regarding abortion without any fear of judgment. And at the same time, we are able to provide them the space or rather a credible source of information. So I'm coming to the second part of your question now, which was what were the gaps that we see right now, especially when we are talking about abortion. So I think the biggest gap that is there is that abortion is still, whenever anybody is talking about abortion, or when we see abortion being talked about in mainstream media, it's still being discussed in a very legal, it's talked about in legal issues. It's talked about a medical issue. It's talked about a moral issue. I think we should just focus on the fact that it's essential healthcare. It's as simple as that. I think we just tend to complicate things. It's essential healthcare. It's a health service. Anybody who seeks the service should have access to it. Secondly, I mentioned this: young people are missing. So if we want to, we need to, focus on them, bring them back into the conversation. Talk about their experiences, their queries, their doubts. And lastly, I think we should talk about the emotional context or the emotional aspect of abortion. It is healthcare, but it's also an emotional experience. There's a huge emotional context attached to abortion. So I think that is something that we don't talk about enough.
Absolutely, Neha. I think what the both of you are really saying is that this access is not just access to some clinic door. It's about language, it's about safety, it's about privacy, it's about whether people expect to be treated with dignity or not. I hear so many abortion seekers, especially young people, almost make peace with the fact that it's going to be a traumatizing experience for them, and that shouldn't really be the case. So it's a very interesting platform that we have here. We have, both a healthcare system representative and a campaign representative here. So how do the both of you, Neha and Ashutosh, this question is to the both of you, how can healthcare systems and campaigns work together? You're doing a good job here. So how do you build that trust and reduce stigma for young people? Do you feel like you're on the same page? Are there negotiations that need to happen in terms of what issues to prioritize? But yeah, maybe Ashutosh, you can go first, and Neha, then I'd like to hear from you. How are you collaborating to make this work?
Yeah. See, again, addressing these issues requires a targeted awareness campaign, improved, ensuring that, the privacy is maintained. We can strengthen the rural healthcare system, ensuring that, timely, stigma-free access to abortion services. And on top of it, I think it is also important to sensitize the media. At times the media, they come up with news which is not appropriately worded. So that is something, if you can sensitize the media persons, that would also help us. So I'll pass it on to Neha to add to it.
Thank you. I think, yes, I completely agree with that. And see, the stigma, and especially it is social stigma surrounding abortion, it's pretty deep rooted. So, if we are aiming at some way to dismantle it, we need partnerships. So, partnerships between a coalition and service providers so that it becomes lived realities. The service providers or healthcare providers, they ground the conversation. They talk about real service delivery here, access points. When we're talking about coalitions like Pratigya, because a lot of our work is on social media, on digital platforms, what we are working towards is shaping the narrative, how abortion is talked about, how the public perceptions are shaped, what language is being used. And because we also work with young people, and we also try to create these youth friendly digital spaces, that is where the aspect of trust comes in. When they feel like this is a safe space for them, it is easier for them to share experiences, to share queries, for them to come and engage more. So I think that is how partnerships or coalitions like Pratigya and service providers like FRHs can, come together to address the stigma together.
Yeah, absolutely. Nothing about us without us, eh? So we definitely need a seat at that table, consulting with you alongside you, so that we actually make policies, and we actually work on systems that are functional for us, that are accessible for us. I remember, like, when I worked in UP and Bihar, there would be like adolescent friendly healthcare clinics, but they were not functional, or they wouldn't have a counselor, right? Even though it existed in theory. Also, like the route from their place to the hospital, right? Like people spotting you, privacy, so many issues that the both of you have brought up. So I think we're all really focused on like really moving this from access to also experience, to really see how real people are experiencing access to abortion services, and not the sensational version, or like, the thing that we report to our donors, not that kind, but the real one, the messy, sometimes quiet, sometimes big, and it's always shaped by context. So yeah, Vitika, I'd love to hear from you now. What are some emotional or behavioral patterns that you might have noticed when young people share about their abortion experiences in safe or digital spaces, like Neha pointed out?
Thank you so much. Actually, much of it has been shared, because when we're talking about a topic like abortion, an experience like abortion, the stigma and the judgment that one would feel in a clinic, or in a family, or with friends, is also something that you see in the online spaces. And I think what we also see most clearly is that it is not just that abortion itself is really the trauma, it is really the judgment and stigma and isolation that young people feel. And that really is huge, in terms of how young people are feeling. Then there are different experiences, of course, that people share, and there are a few patterns that come up again and again. Of course, one very important one is what we have all been talking about, the fear of being judged, right? Because everybody's worrying more about the fact that लोग क्या सोचेंगे, किसको पता चल जाएगा, क्या होगा. And it's not just the medical procedure, but it's just the fear of what everyone, from the doctors to family to your partner, to your friends, to whosoever, even posting something on the online community with the trust that will this be public, will this be anonymous, will this be confidential. So there is a lot of fear that they are dealing with. And then there is also internalized shame, because that is coming from the society that we are part of, that is coming from the kind of language that has been used around abortion for a very long time. And it's language is very important, and it is something that, when we are putting out information or content out there, rarely we are looking at the language around it. There's so much around something being irresponsible behavior, something around being a mistake, that shows up so frequently across all kinds of forums, and family and doctors and multimedia and pop culture, no matter what you look at. So reflecting on that moral messaging, that comes from all these sources, also is a pattern that we often, of course, see. There is a strong need for anonymity that I think I've already pointed that out. But there is also, sometimes there is this feeling of relief, which is mixed with guilt, because, when young people feel that they have probably, had immediate relief, or they could get an abortion, they're also sharing experiences of how that relief is quickly followed by guilt. And it is not so much about personal regret. It is a lot about what they feel the society thinks is wrong, and what has been told as something that it should feel bad about. Also, they find themselves very lonely in this process, in this whole thing. So it's a lot that they are, sort of, they're dealing with.
Yeah, Vitika, absolutely. I'm so glad that all of us are so grounded to what young people are actually saying and feeling. I often receive questions in my DMs around this, and you're so right, Vitika. It's also that relief and that guilt surrounding that relief that really comes up. And we're also, like, just as a society, not necessarily taught how to hold space for that sadness that might come up, right? Also, just literally your hormones drop. For instance, if you go through a medical abortion, like literally your progesterone and estrogen levels are dropping, which means that it's even beyond beyond one's logic and control, right? Like that kind of care that is required is at a hormonal, is at an emotional healing level. So thank you so much for that, Vitika. I just also wanted to maybe ask you a follow-up question on what does this supportive, non-triggering language, what can it look like when you speak to young audiences about abortion and mental health? If you could maybe give us an example or two, that would be helpful. I know you already said things around shaming and morality, etc., to avoid that. But what is some affirming thing that we could say, for instance?
Yeah. One of the most important thing is, sorry, am I audible? Yeah. One of the most important thing is for the language to be choice affirming. Now, what does that really mean? We can in this conversation we can talk about choice affirming language, but that really does not mean anything to people unless and until we unpack it. And the fact that when we are having conversations with young people and we are creating these spaces, you have to ensure that they feel that they're not alone. We are listening to them, and the fact that there is also no right emotional response. It's also kind of, again, like what you mentioned, holding this space. Like, you also have to feel what you're feeling, and we are right here and we hear you and we are listening to you. You're also not alone. There are many of us and many other young people who have gone through similar experiences, and which is why it becomes so much more important that we talk about it and we build this community and we build this understanding on this issue. So I think listening and making a person sort of really feel with your language that is choice affirming, that you're also allowed to feel relief. It's fine. The fact that you really needed an abortion, and the fact that you could get one is also something that you need to feel some sort of, you don't need to feel the guilt for that, but it is also something that you have to keep the conversation on. Again, I think the biggest problem is, when we talk about language, the difference between fear-based and fact-based, right? Fear-based to rights-based and choice-affirming language. And again, the fact that what is the legality, but again, unpacking it in a way that a person can really understand what does that mean for them in their, if in context of their lived experiences and the country that they're living in. What is medically safe when it is something is done correctly? I think that is also very, very important. Now, of course, most of the communication around everything that we see is fear-based. We also find a lot of confusing information in online spaces, because while everybody is trying to give information, not everybody is really understanding what does really choice-affirming, rights-based language really look like, and something that has to be simple. It doesn't have to be full of jargons. And something which, again, I think listening is so important. The fact that you're really able to kind of, make sure that you're not assuming anything about the choices they made or about their situation, and try not saying things like, "Oh, this must have been very painful," but the fact that, well, do you want to talk about it? And I understand what you're feeling, and we are here to offer support. What do you think we can do to help you? So I think it is a lot about kind of not having assumptions as well, and it's about really having a conversation. And I think that, so safe language and language, I think, plays such an important role, from moving from jargon to fear-based language to more rights-based, simple, easy to understand, and very friendly conversational language. And of course, they are trusting you with that information, so they also need to know that you will not share this information any further without, of course, their consent.
Absolutely.
Even if to create a piece around it, you will not do that without their permission.
Definitely. Yeah. And I think you've brought up not just what we're supposed to say, but also what we're not supposed to say. Language is also having that judicious judgment in the moment and training around it. So thank you, Vitika. I think you've also given us the perfect segue to invite Japleen in. Japleen, feminism in India has always been such a proponent of this affirming language, right? Especially in the case of like sexual assault and intimate partner violence. You've done some prolific work in that area. When it comes to, like, let's say something like abortion, how do media narratives, and maybe we can move to like a few concrete examples if possible, how do they shape the public perception of abortion, especially for young people? Over to you, Japleen.
Hi everyone, thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for that question, Aparupa. So definitely, yes, media narratives play a very decisive role in determining whether abortion is understood as a legitimate healthcare choice or as a moral failing. And in India, especially, mainstream media has historically framed abortion through lenses of tragedy, secrecy, or criminality, often centered on extreme cases rather than everyday realities. And through FI's work, both on reporting as well as campaigns like Abortion Mera Hak, we have seen how alternative feminist media can shift this narrative by situating abortion within lived experiences, legality, and bodily autonomy. We have many articles where we are covering stories of abortion as well as how to write about abortion. And actually, we have done media guides on ethical reporting of abortion in collaboration with the YP Foundation, apart from gender-based violence. Many young audiences who come to our website, who encounter such information, for the first time through digital platforms, for them it is important that media framing, it's directly shaping how they feel about sexual health and about abortion, and it influences, are they feeling fear or shame or confidence in seeking information on care. So it's crucial that media frames abortion as a healthcare issue and not as a question of morality. And when abortion is not portrayed as immoral, it doesn't reinforce silence. But when it is framed as healthcare and choice, it opens up space for informed decision making and emotional honesty.
Yeah, big fan of the work, Chaplin. But just a quick follow-up question to you: what do you see the other platforms get information and messaging around abortion consistently wrong? What is it like? Of course, heard a lot about like fear-based language. We've also heard about shaming, moral policing. But like, what are the specific platforms? What are they getting wrong? And how do you think they can bridge that gap?
Yeah. So I think I'll go back to what the other panelists have also said about language. And we have, covered this in our media guide that is also easily accessible via our website. Is that the language is not centered, it's not centered towards the abortion seeker, and it's not centered as a healthcare issue, but again as a moral issue. So there are, basic fault lines that mainstream media platforms do is, for example, calling the abortion seeker mother. Now that's one of the biggest recommendations we have, that you do not use the word mother in any circumstance. Secondly, not using the word baby, and using medical words like embryo or fetus. These are some of the basic recommendations. Then, of course, because we are dealing with digital media, so digital media comes with, a visual element. It's not like you are reading a report in a newspaper. So when we are with a visual element, there's always some kind of image that comes when you're reading things on Instagram, X, whatever the platform. And you would see that the images that accompany abortion reporting are extremely triggering in nature. And I don't even want to describe them here, because they have this like a scissor, and like it's very triggering, very graphic. And we recommend that very neutral images should be shown when depicting abortion. So as neutral as, a person, a woman, just sitting at a clinic and waiting for her turn. And we have created some of these images for mainstream media to use. So these, this is very important, because when and our target audience is also young people. We are a young media platform, and we are a digital only media platform. So that means we are targeting people who are scrolling on their phones, right? And we want people to see positive, affirmative images when we are talking about sensitive issues like abortion. We have done the same for our gender-based violence work, where we have shown, positive imagery, in the sense that we have shown the perpetrator in highlight, as opposed to always showing the victim in some corner, crying, etc. So that's like the same kind of, I would say, patriarchal imagery that exists in our media landscape, both for GBV as well as for abortion, where the focus is on the person who is suffering in both cases. And in this case especially, the person ideally shouldn't have to, because it should be a healthcare right. And as Ashutosh mentioned correctly, the MTP Act is actually an exception to the the Criminal Amendment Act. I'm not sure exactly which one, but we know that abortion is illegal and MTP is an exception to that. And like the way that visual imagery also works is you have done something wrong, and that is why now you need this. And I think for young women especially who are unmarried, even though now the law does not differentiate between married and unmarried women, but even though I think given that
They
we live in
still
a
ask for the
society.
husband's name, Japleen, so you're not
Yeah,
wrong.
and
So, yeah.
we live in a we still live in a traditional conservative society where premarital sex is not encouraged at all, right? So when an unmarried woman goes to a clinic and says, I need an abortion, there is a lot of judgment and stigma. And media does play a role in accessing that. And I remember some of the headlines that we came across when we were doing research was like something on the lines of fruits of fun, and like, oh, now weren't you thinking when you were having unprotected sex or whatever, like that's how it was framed, and this is the result now, it's your fault. So this line of reasoning is not even what is known as pro-life, because you are not being pro-life to anyone, neither to the person who is pregnant, and not to the to the fetus. I don't want to use the word baby, but not to the fetus who may be born if this person is not able to get an abortion. So it's a very, I feel, it's a very complex situation for the abortion seeker, where they have to face judgment and stigma, as well as the way some of these cases, because we see so many cases now going to the Supreme Court. And I agree with Ashutosh completely that abortion is such a time sensitive issue, concern, and it needs to be done in the first, ideally it needs to be done in the first trimester. But these cases go on, and we see how the judges sorry, 1 second. The Supreme Court and the High Court judges recommendations are also not standardized, and that was actually recently covered in a study which FI also analyzed, and it's on our website, that there has been a lot of bias when it comes to who who gets an abortion and who doesn't. Yeah, I think I'll stop here, and then we can go on to the next round of questions.
Yeah, absolutely, Japleen. I think what both you and Ashutosh have wonderfully brought up in this conversation is how the law has also kind of tied our hands, like with the existence of POCSO, with the existence of MTP, and also what you said about non-marital sex and how that is such a stigma, which then means that any follow-up service that we access post that, whether that's for sexual health, whether that's for an STI, whether that's for an abortion, whether that's for an injury that one might have during consensual sex, like all of that is then penalized. And as a culture as well, we do tend to have a very blaming attitude. When I work with like young people and when I work with their parents, I often tell them that you do blame your child when your child gets a cold. You say, oh, you ate something, or you were out in the rain and that's how you've gotten the cold. While that is, sure, you want to teach your child the consequences, it really blames the survivor, the person who's going through the distress in the moment. And that then becomes a dog whistle, which is what Japleen, you're also saying, that like those tiny messages, that subliminal messaging really like seeps into our consciousness. And Vitika, what you also brought up, and Neha, you as well, about how that impacts our emotional well-being through accessing something as sensitive, time sensitive, and like socially, morally sensitive, very realistically, like an abortion. So yeah, Neha, I think this is the right time to actually bring you back as well. I want to hear a bit more about how Pratigya campaign intentionally centers emotional well-being and lived experiences in its communication work. I see you work with a lot of young creators, you work with feminist media, you work with service providers. I'm sure like your coalition itself consists a lot of these folks. So yeah, so curious to hear as to like how this works, and how are you actively centering emotional well-being?
Since you mentioned young people, and we do work with a lot of young people, and a lot of our social media or digital efforts are focused at young people, one of the first things that we try to do is think of young people as experts at their own life. Like, we don't need to tell them, what is good for them. They know what they are doing. So when we start from that core belief, all the messaging that we are trying to create, or the content we are trying to create, we don't look at them as these passive recipients of information. More as somebody, as a co-creator, if I can call it. So that is where, we start with. Secondly, we a lot of our work is about storytelling, but that storytelling is grounded in evidence. So when we are talking storytelling, we are talking about lived experiences. We are talking about emotional experiences that people have had. If people are sharing about the emotions that they are feeling, but at the same time, we are also trying to bring in an aspect or ground that conversation by adding some evidence, just so what we are talking about is not completely, clinical, but it is something that is more relatable. So that is the middle ground that we try to, reach. And definitely, we spoke about it earlier also. We are focused at creating a digital space that is safe, that is stigma free. When we are talking about emotions, when we are talking about emotional well-being, we don't try to dismiss anything. Not try to take that approach, that blanket narrative or one size fits all, because every individual and the experience that they're going through, the emotional experience or the lived realities, is going to be very unique. So we try to be as inclusive there as possible, not try to say that basically there are no rights or wrong. You are going through an experience, be it in terms of your physical experience of service delivery, or when you were a recipient for services, or the emotional journey that you are going through. Each one of those emotions are valid, and there's no right or wrong. And if you've experienced it, you want to talk about it, then we are trying to create a space where it's easy for you to talk about it.
Absolutely. If you want to talk about it, you can talk about it.
Yeah,
If you want to ask for care,
absolutely.
you can.
Yeah.
Because being pro-choice is also being pro-life, right? And that's what we're really saying. It's your choice, it's your body. I absolutely so inspired by the work that y'all do at the Secretariat. I just also want to quickly bring back Ashutosh. Ashutosh, I missed asking you this. When a young person reaches out for an abortion, what are the first couple of things that they usually need from the system, like practically and emotionally, since we're talking about the emotional aspect of things? As a care provider, what are two things that you think, if they are sorted, the young person can move forward with a lot more ease?
Absolutely. So, the first thing is that it is important to have a good network of private and public facilities so that, the access is easy. That is one. The second is that, again, sort of a training is required to the providers so that they become sensitive. They should understand, what's going in abortion seekers mind. That is also very important, because as I was saying earlier, right from the person reaches to front desk till the time the person takes the procedure, any judgmental comment will take her away. I mean, she will go away and will not take services, and that means what would be the impact? The impact to that would be she will end up having an unsafe abortion. She might go to somebody who's got a trained provider, which is happening in India. If you look at the maternal deaths in India, 8% is just because of the people because of unsafe abortion.
Oh, absolutely, Ashutosh. And I love how you keep like redirecting the lens towards yourself and like working on and talking about how do we fix this system, right? Like, how do we make sure that young people, even before they make this decision to like get their pregnancy evaluated or access an abortion service, like, how do you make it a safe experience for them from then? And I think that's truly wonderful. I just really want to underline something very important that all of you have brought up, which is that there is absolutely no right or wrong way to feel after an abortion. Relief is real, Grief is also real. Numbness can be real, and sometimes nothing much is felt, and that is also real. What you said, Neha, that like there is no right or wrong way to go about this. There are only human rights, and abortion is a human right. Let's now talk about healing through solidarity, because that's been something that's really come up as a common thread across all our conversations. Solidarity is often just a slogan, but here we are talking about solidarity in practice. We're talking about who shows up, who believes in you, who is the person who's going to help you get that accurate information, and who will hold your hand and stay with you through the process, stay kind with you. So Neha, again, over to you. From a moment perspective, what does this rights-based, compassionate approach to abortion at scale, like what does that look like? One or two people, sure, you can give them that kind of time, attention, information, but like when you're especially trying to reach out to so many young people, of course the digital platform enables that, but even outside of that, how do you make sure that it reaches everyone with the same kind of like impact that someone who might live in a city and might have access to digital devices, might have privacy, the kind of information they might access would be very different from another context. So yeah, would love to hear from you as to how you're navigating this.
You spoke about, rights-based communication. How does that look? So we spoke about it earlier also, and I think it's very simple if you really think about it. And if simplify things, I think they become more impactful. So that is how we are working. So in case of abortion, the basic line should be that it is essential healthcare. When we start looking at abortion like that, I think things start simplifying. And if we are looking at abortion as essential healthcare, then if it is somebody, say, in a urban context, or it is somebody in a rural context, it is probably somebody who's in their mid-30s and probably married, or it could be somebody who's unmarried and in their early or late teens. Either way, then it becomes the same experience, or should become the same experience. So when we start treating abortion as essential healthcare, that level of uniformity kind of comes in, because it means the same for everybody everywhere. So that was one way we were looking at abortion, to ensure that it's more right based. It's not a
Neha,
legal
sorry to
debate.
cut you here. Just like a curious follow-up question. I absolutely, you're right. It has to be standardized, the language, the care, the access, all of it. But at the same time, there is also a cultural context to abortion, right? And that is very real. And as much as like, of course, like all of us on this platform and folks listening to it also do believe that, you have a right over your own body. Especially in our context, it is easier said than done. So maybe a little bit as to like how one navigates that as well would be really helpful.
If you're talking about cultural, and especially, coming from the country that we are in, and, our social setup or our cultural norms just create this layer of stigma around abortion. So talking about it is difficult. And even as a coalition, we face those challenges where we want to talk very openly about abortion and talk about it in very absolute objective terms, because there is no shame attached to it, or there shouldn't be any shame attached to it. But we at the same time also want to spread or keep our messaging so that it's not offensive. So we are very mindful that we are talking to a community that is not used to abortion being talked about in such open in such open language. So we cannot just in their face throw abortion and that kind of messaging by saying, no, we are not ashamed about it. We want to be a little more nuanced about it so that it's not offensive. So we want to talk about abortion in a very positive sense, in a very affirmative sense, in a very rights-based sense, but at the same time, not something that is offensive, or if it insults anybody's cultural or religious sentiments. I think that is this fine line we try to tread when we think about the cultural aspect of it all.
Absolutely. And which is why, Neha, spaces like this, which, take into account the narrative change work that y'all are doing, and also like archiving all the work that you're doing and speaking about it in public forums is so important. So yeah, thank you for being so generous with all the wealth of information that Pratigya has collected. I'd like to bring Vitika on at this point. Vitika, what role do peer networks and digital communities, how do they make young people feel less alone? Again, it's very similar to what I was like trying to chat with Neha about as well, especially like at scale, especially like, in these online spaces. Privacy is important, safety is important, ongoing care is important, but how do they actually contribute to solidarity when it comes to, go over to you.
You spoke of peer narratives and
So your peer networks and digital communities, like how are they helping in young, how do they help young people feel less alone? Yeah, that's
helping or not helping.
or not helping. Exactly. Yeah.
I think I'll pick the digital community first, which I think is extremely powerful. And if I have to especially, speak of digital creators and influencers, the thing is when the creators are speaking responsibly, openly, fact-based information and in language that reduces misinformation, is is probably modeling what emotional honesty is all about, and not trying to sensationalize and moralize, that is when it is really, really powerful and really, really helpful. I think the challenge that is a little bit about digital communities is that there's so much out there, and everybody, it's nice because everybody wants to speak about it, but it also somewhere creates a little bit of a confusion in terms of what kind of language are we using around it. Some of the basic things, right? Like even using the terminology of a baby and why not, and how to kind of go about it. Or even when we're talking about digital spaces, we're also talking about some form of media and information in a certain way. So I feel like having that community is so powerful and so important, but also the fact that what is our responsibility as creators when we are speaking on a certain topic, and how is knowledge shared within that community of choice affirming language, and what needs to be shared responsibility. I think that is still a little bit of a challenge, but again, really, really powerful. Speaking of peer networks, I mean, I think that in my experience and what I have seen is extremely powerful, because the fact that you're not alone and someone else has also gone through this and survived, what was the experience like, the fact that you can relate that experience with someone is very, very powerful. It also somewhere helps normalize the conversation. So peer stories, obviously they reduce the fear and the stigma, but then it's also important that it creates a body of knowledge and information around what is not right within the systems, within the communities, within the families, and what needs to change. So I think from that perspective, both these are they have a very, very important role.
Absolutely, Vitika. And I myself have definitely accessed peer networks to get trusted gynacs or trusted health professionals, to access services that I might not otherwise know where to go for. So absolutely, they are extremely powerful. It's also interesting that you brought up how they might not work. So would you like to touch upon that briefly? How do you think maybe these peer networks or like these online spaces, what can go wrong?
Again, I'm speaking based on my experience. Sometimes the fact that people don't know better or don't know enough is also something they're made to feel ashamed of, and largely the people who know better, like you're using this language and what and how. And the fact is that, well, how many young people have actually learned about abortion from textbooks or from schools? No one. We are all knowledge that is coming from our peer networks, from pop culture, from TV, so we're all on a journey. But what is also not helpful is that in the community, when somebody who does not know enough or ends up using language that is inappropriate, we don't get into why this person needs to know better, rather than, so I feel, I mean, generally the world that we are living in, it's so polarized. We just really do not have the willingness to listen and to kind of take the person to a journey of learning and unlearning. And I think there is very little, people don't want to do that. And that's the challenge that I find with the communities, because everybody's ready to charge at someone else for not knowing what they know, rather than creating a community of sharing and learning. And really, I mean, we work in this space, so we know about it more than anyone else. But most people will not know about a lot of things that we work on, is simply because this is not their bread and butter. This is not what they're doing in their everyday lives. So of course that knowledge is missing. Of this knowledge is not widely available. So I think creating that space, and that open space, and acknowledging that there is a lot of unlearning, like we have probably been on a journey of unlearning, is very important. And I really feel that is missing.
For sure, Vitika, what you're saying about calling in people as opposed to calling out people, I completely resonate with that. You also brought up something really interesting around when content is not monetized. There's also that space, there's room for us to like be more open, be more affirming, include different kinds of information. So I see that we, all of us as content creators, as advocates, as media houses, as healthcare providers, as coalitions, we're navigating so many things when it comes to like providing information. Jopleen, I would like to bring you on for one of our last questions of the evening. There is such a thing as, and when we've spoken about this extensively throughout our conversation about post-abortion emotions, I've also heard like some minor research here and there around post-abortion syndrome, which does show up similar to like actually having delivered. Very little research, of course, around this, but I'm curious to hear from you as to like how do you how can you, as like a leading feminist media house in this space, how can you become this thought leader and contribute to solidarity rather than stigma, especially like when it comes to like these post-abortion emotions of like grief, relief, all those things that we brought up during our session, and focus on healing.
Thank you for that question. I think I want to go back to my panelists. I think especially what Neha said, that abortion is a complex issue. It's something that we cannot accept on a binary. Like we have to engage it from an emotional nuance. So I think first of all, accepting that complexity is in itself is. As a media organization and as a feminist media organization, to normalize that it is a complex issue and people will have all sorts of emotions after, going through an abortion and post-abortion, which can also include guilt, as Vitika had also mentioned previously, that from relief to guilt. So I think accepting that all of these emotions are valid is a feminist response. If somebody is going through guilt, that I am relieved that I had an abortion, but I'm also feeling guilty. And we know, even as feminists, we are not we are not perfect, and we have had so much social conditioning that even as feminists, we have body image issues, we have all kinds of issues, and we have not been able to, I don't know how to say it, but like remove ourselves from these conflicting thoughts and emotions that we have, while understanding where they come from, like what is the root of these issues. I'm just giving an example with body image. So I think similarly, when it comes to abortion, if people who have undergone abortion are having complex emotions, including guilt, I think first of all, accepting and not making a big deal out of it is a feminist response. And that's something that also, as a feminist media organization, we portray in our stories. We have also, as part of our previous campaigns, we have had we have a couple of stories and also videos where we interviewed women. Sorry, we interviewed women who went through abortion, and these were women from various age groups and various sections of the society. Some were already mothers, some were young students, and they all had their own reasons. And that this is something that I have learned in my early days when I was learning about abortion. I attended a lot of abortion advocacy programs. Is there is no good reason to have an abortion. Like we cannot judge anyone of why they had an abortion. Like, who deserves an abortion? Everybody deserves an abortion, irrespective of what you think is, oh, this person deserves an abortion, but this person doesn't deserve an abortion. So I think for us, that has been a really, I would say, very key learning for me, and that's something that we have embedded in our storytelling, and how we present our stories across formats. We have covered abortion across various formats. We have done campaigns, videos, podcast, articles, obviously, and now we also have a media guide that we launched last year in collaboration with the YP Foundation. That is, one central point for us in representing feminist stories, is to show the raw emotions and to accept complexity, and to accept that there is a lot of emotional nuance when it comes to abortion. And we also want to focus on, obviously, first person narratives without sensationalizing them, avoiding language that assumes regret or trauma, and separating that emotional experience from moral judgment. And one thing that we have been trying to do, and organizations like Pratigya and Love Matters have been very helpful, is in including credible information on counseling, support, and aftercare. That's also something that we have covered. All these crowdsourced resources that you also mentioned. We also make a point to cover them on our website. First, from a very technical, this thing is that when people are searching, the first thing it pops up on Google. So if somebody is searching, where do I get an abortion, there are a bunch of articles that come up, and we want that these kind of credible resources pop up. So we cover them, and we also include them towards the end of an article, so that anyone who is reading this and is needing an abortion, and maybe that's how they came to our article, because they were googling on the internet, that they can then go through these resources. And lastly, I think also what young audiences respond most strongly to is honest, non-preachy, and peer-led storytelling. As I mentioned earlier, FI is a youth-led platform. Most of our readers and writers both are young people between the age of 18 to 30. And that is what also our team represents. So we also receive a lot of, because we're a digital platform, so there's a lot of dynamic feedback happening via social media, via emails. And our writers represent the target audience that we serve. So we are able to build that trust with our audience by focusing on peer-led storytelling, and taking like regular feedback from our readers.
Yeah, thanks, Japlin, for that like quick masterclass on how to hack the algorithm. And yeah, I really appreciate that we're talking not just about abortion in theory, but we're really talking about how it permeates all these different aspects of our life. Ashutosh, we have a very interesting audience question for you, and maybe we close on this note. The question to you is, what should young people feel empowered to ask for or expect from a clinic that includes emotional safety and dignity, and not just the procedure? So when I go to a provider, what can I ask? How do I advocate for myself?
See, that's a very good question. Now, the problem is that, the client, the abortion seeker, she's not going to the provider. So let me explain it by giving you an example. 85% of total abortions happens in India are first trimester, which are medical abortion. Now, for the medical abortion, all you need, go to a provider. The client should go to a provider. The provider can counsel him or her to the person. And then, of course, the combi pack will be under prescriptions can be taken. Now, what is happening in these 85, the reason more than half of the abortions in India are unsafe, because what is happening is that the person is not going to the provider or to the chemist. It is somebody else taking the medicines on behalf of her. Either Sita Gita ko batayegi, Gita आगे किसी को बताएगी, and then पता लगी अरे मेरा husband एक बार लेके आया था. And then of course what happens in that case, they will not know the right procedure of taking these medicines, and they will end up having a severe complications. So I think it should be the client who should be in center.
Absolutely. No, I wasn't even aware of this, Ashutosh. Thank you for bringing that, to our notice that that is very true if you were to think about it. So let's say I show up to an abortion clinic. What are some things what are some 2, 3 things that I need to make sure that are there so that I have a safe experience?
First of all, the scarcity of provider in India, I mean, it is very less. So from a public sector point of view, it is government responsibility to spend the pool of provider. And yes, of course, from a private sector point of view, of course, you need to have a good provider. You need to have, I mean, again, somebody else was also referring it. It is not the procedure. It is the, how you are taking care of clients through the emotional trauma or emotional, well-being at that point in time. That is something which is very important. So what it is required, it starts with the counseling. A proper counseling will remove these fears. Then not only counseling, covering all those minimal risks that she might take up and can go across. All these things has to be covered in a manner that client is in the center. It is her body, her choice, and everything else is surrounding the client, including the procedure.
Absolutely. That was a mic drop moment, Ashutosh. It is the client, it is their body, and everything else surrounds that. So, yeah, thank you so much to all of you. And thank you to our audience for staying with us in this conversation. And, this conversation does ask so much honesty and also softness from all of us at the same time. And I can pat us all on our back and say we did a good job with that. Of course, what came through this hour is abortion is healthcare, end of story. It's also an emotional and a social experience. Young people have a right to accurate information, timely care. We've been impressed upon how it is a time sensitive issue throughout our conversation, and language that does not punish young people for being human or any person accessing abortion, really. Healing is part of the care. Our stories matter. Strength comes from the support that we have around us, which is where coalitions, which is where even online digital spaces, media houses have a huge role to play. You want to keep learning, sharing, and building a stigma free culture around abortion care and mental health, please follow and engage with the Pratigya campaign's work and resources. They're truly fantastic. Joplin has also kindly shared some resources that Feminism in India, along with YP Foundation, has produced. So, yeah, thank you so much to our speakers and to everybody who joined us. Please take care of yourselves. And yeah, please write into us with your thoughts and with your ideas, and we'd love to hear them. Thank you.